Welcome to Kevin Deal Photography, where I take you on my journey through photography. On today's episode, I'm going to tell you about my long-term thoughts on my Canon EOS R5. The Canon EOS R5 was announced in the summer of 2020. It was Canon's first serious attempt to dive into the mirrorless market. With its 45 megapixel sensor and 8K raw video capabilities, it no doubt turned some heads and grabbed the attention of many working professionals who couldn't sell those DSLR 5Ds or push those fickle and frustrated users on the other systems to switch over fast enough. But no camera is perfect, and this release was not without controversy for some photographers and videographers. I have my own experiences with the Canon EOS R5, which can only be told the only way I know how to, through my own work. Welcome to today's episode. If you're not familiar with Kevin Deal Photography, we do gear reviews, tips, techniques, and tutorials, and sometimes we dive into film. If any of that sounds appealing to you, click the subscribe button below. So on today's episode, I'm going to give you my long-term review of the EOS R5. This is not going to be a review where we go into specs and things like that because this camera came out 2 years ago, and honestly, you can just search Canon R5 review and find millions of reviews on this very camera. Now, instead, we're going to go over my personal work, and we're going to talk about why I love this camera. And we're also going to address the fact that apparently they're coming out with a new one. So let's talk about the things that I love about this camera and why this camera is still very relevant because it's only 2 years old and it'll take incredible pictures for you. So I actually work on several camera systems. If you don't know, I work on Canon, I work on Fuji X, I work on Fuji GF. I also shoot a lot of film. So I shoot Mamiya RB67, a Mamiya C330. I shoot on a Minolta X700. I shoot on a Canon Rebel G. I have a lot of film cameras that I use in addition to digital cameras that I use. And yes, I do use all of them on my professional work. Where does the Canon fit into the grand scheme of things? Well, it's my main camera. The R5, anytime I get hired for something that is super important and reliability is the number one thing, I use my Canon R5. If I get hired out for a wedding, I use my R5. If I get hired for commercial work, I use my R5. Anytime I need my autofocus to be 100% reliable, yes, I go for my R5. I have an EOS R7 as well as a backup. You can check out my review, my 3-part review for that, and a link in the description below. It is a great backup to the R5. But now that we have rumors of a R5 Mark II coming out, well, maybe I'll make this guy the backup and the new one, be the primary camera. But anytime I need something reliable, this camera is dependable. The ergonomics on it are amazing. And for the most part, the picture quality is amazing. Now, I do have some small gripes about the colors and how editing is in post-production, especially Lightroom users for the longest time couldn't find profiles for it. But for stills photography, I just got to say, I have zero complaints about this camera. Anytime I'm hired for stills, it gets the job done. As you can see, I'm showing you examples of my work that I've done with this camera, whether I'm in the studio, whether I'm on location. This hits a home run pretty much every time. And I mentioned that I also shoot Fuji as well, both medium format and their APS-C crop. The reason I shoot on several systems is because I love Canon, but their L lenses are pretty big. And when I travel, weight and size is a consideration. And so that is a drawback to working with these Canon cameras. Now, they do make some great non-L lenses, but I think Fuji's flagship lenses are a little better, and they're smaller overall as a system. So there are projects where I like to use the Fuji X. Sometimes I just want to go out with a model out into the streets real quick, not carry around a bunch of weight. I find that the Fuji does a great job for that. And since it's personal work, if I miss a couple eyes every now and then with the autofocus, because the Fuji, it does not have as good autofocus as the Canon, as most of you know, although the XH2 and XH2S are getting a lot better in that regard. But I still favor the Canon anytime I have very serious work where consistency and hit rates matter. And then when I do my fine art stuff, I use my Fuji GF for that, which I love, but has an absolutely terrible autofocus, my GFX. And so I love this camera, and I make money off this camera. Like, this camera has made me more money than any other camera that I've ever owned. And so I love this camera, and when the new version of it does come out, I am going to probably keep this guy as a backup, as I previously mentioned. I told you what I love about it. Something that I love about all Canon cameras too is I just love the fact that when you are changing a lens out and you turn it off, that a window comes down over the sensor, and so you don't get dust or debris on it. I've had this camera for 2 years, and I've cleaned the sensor 0 times. The sensor's exposed because the camera's on, and you really shouldn't do this very often. I'm just doing it for an example. Now I'm going to turn the camera off. And then this little window comes down over it. And I love that, because when you're changing a lens, the way it really operates is you just take this, you put it on, you turn it on. Now the sensor's exposed. And so the sensor is only exposed while you have a lens over it, and that's great. And so I love that about the R5, and they have it in other Canon cameras, but that's just something that I want to talk about. If you're like maybe switching over from another brand and you're wondering some cool features about like the R5 that maybe some other cameras don't have, that's a really cool feature that Canon puts in most of their $1,000 and up cameras. So I love that, and it has saved me. I've been out into white sands, I've been on beaches, I've been in downpours where I've needed to change lenses, and this feature has saved me on several occasions. So love that. I have already mentioned, but the ergonomics are amazing. It fits like a glove. I love my Fuji cameras, but whenever I come back over to my R5, I just pick it up and I'm like, oh yeah, there it is. It fits like an old glove, as they say. And so I love that about the R5. And then we stop and talk about the things maybe that I don't like about the R5, things that I want to improve upon, and almost all of them look like they're being addressed in the R5 Mark II rumors, which is great. Now, one thing on the R5 Mark II rumors that they talk about is that they have a 61 megapixel sensor versus I think this is a 45. I really don't care about that. I own a Fuji GFX 100S, and while megapixels are great, dynamic range is much more important to me, but it will have the dual Digic X processor, so it's going to borrow from like the R3 and things like that. It's going to look awesome. 30 frames per second electronic shutter. I don't really use electronic shutter much. I have 12 frames per second mechanical. That's plenty fine for me. If I need to be super fast, I usually use my R7 anyway for sports and subjects that move really fast. 8 stops of IBIS, which is cool. They have a 2x, 4x, and 8x digital teleconverter, which my Fuji XH2 has. I'm assuming that also shrinks the amount of megapixels you use, I'm guessing. I'm assuming that's a crop. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. I haven't seen enough on this, and this is just purely rumors at this point. But the elephant in the room is when I first got the R5, I solely purchased it for doing stills, and I didn't yet have a YouTube channel. I just started a YouTube channel a year ago, and all of a sudden I found myself needing to shoot video, and I was like, wow, I've got an R5, and I want to shoot things in 4K. Now I shoot 24 frames per second, so I haven't run into the limitations, but man, I have seen a lot of people gripe about the limitations on the R5, the overheating, the record time limits. Supposedly they fixed it, but they also kind of addressed that they're going to improve upon it like what all the other cameras are doing. I really do think that they rushed the R5 to market, and they knew that that was going to be a problem, but they just didn't care because they knew that it was the new 5D basically, right? And that people were just going to flock to it because there were enough amazing things about it. But the video, when it hits, it's awesome. When you get video that doesn't overheat, it's awesome. But it overheats for a lot of people. I live in Texas, shooting a wedding in 4K, and maybe they want to be at 30 or 60 frames per second for certain things. That kind of sucks with this camera. And so apparently we'll be able to do 8K 60p. It still looks like it has a 60-minute recording limit for 4K. Can't we just get rid of the recording limit? I mean, I don't really shoot things longer than 60 minutes, but there are people who maybe like do events, you know, like a hotel or something. There's some long event that's 2 or 3 hours. And yes, I do realize that eventually you might run out of space in your card, but let my card determine when my camera shuts off and not the internals. I think that would be better. One thing that I kind of scratched my head about on this camera and a lot of other cameras is the fact that it only uses one compact flash card and one SD card. And, you know, with your read and write speeds, you are limited by your slowest card. And so it's just like, why don't you just give me 2 really fast ports? They didn't do it with this. Fuji didn't do it with my XH2. Fuji didn't do it with my GFX 100S. And so maybe it's just really hard to get 2 compact CF Express Type B cards in there. Maybe due to overheating, I don't know. I mean, I do know that those cards, when I plug them into my computer, get darn hot. So that could very well be the issue. But I'm glad to see that in the rumors that they're going to put dual CF Express Type B slots in the new R5 Mark II, because I like things to match, right? And I want my fastest card to have a redundant fastest card and everything matches. And so I think that's going to be a really cool addition if that is something that's going to be in there. One other thing that has driven me crazy about the R5 since I've really started to dive more into video is that it does have a mini, micro, whatever, I always get it mixed up, HDMI port. Not a full size, that's the point. And these are very vulnerable to breaking. And so my Fuji XH2, which I'm recording on right now, it actually has a full-size HDMI port, and that is a lovely thing to have. So if they do launch the R5 Mark II, I am begging Canon, put an HDMI port in there, a full-size one, because it's 2023. Get with the times, man. Come on. HDMI is an old technology as it is. It's already like 20 years old. They're also going to talk about full HD 240p. I don't really shoot that high of a frame rate. Sometimes I'll do 120. And I know that I can do internal 120 on this already. So it sounds like there's not going to be a huge upgrade there for me. I'm going to be fine with what's on this already. One thing that I do notice on my R7, and it's on the newer cameras, and I hope that they do this on the R5, is when you put a lens on, it actually tells you in like the bottom, I think it's in the bottom right now that I'm not looking at my R7, I can't remember, but it tells you like, oh, you have a 24 to 105 on here and you're zoomed in at 51 millimeters. It'll actually tell you like what you're at when your eye's in the viewfinder. I think that's really cool, and unfortunately the R5 doesn't have that, and it looks like it's never going to get that with firmware updates. So I'd love to see that in the new version. And then the autofocus. When the R5 came out, the autofocus was a cheat code, and it still is a cheat code. It's just that the R3 came out, and then the R7 came out, and then the R6 Mark II came out. And those are cheat codes to cheat codes. So being able to improve upon this autofocus is going to be amazing, and have those powerful tools. Like I said earlier, I don't really care much about the 61 megapixels on the R5 Mark II, but this camera is amazing, and I have absolutely no intention of ever getting rid of it. I think it has done an incredible job on my work, and as I mentioned earlier, it makes me money. Like, if you can't make money with this camera, it's because of you, not because of the gear, because this gear is fully capable of taking great pictures. 10 years from now, this thing is still running and I put the RF lenses on it, it's still going to take incredible pictures. And, you know, who knows where we'll be with video at that point. The bottom line is it's only 2 years old, and so if you're on the fence about upgrading, like I'm talking about upgrading to the R5 Mark II, but it really isn't high in my priority list, because nobody's saying, hey, you have the Mark I version of the R5. I'm no longer giving you money for these jobs because you don't have good enough equipment for it. Nobody's going to say anything like that. Heck, I don't even need an R5 to make money. I can go get a Canon Rebel for a lot of jobs and make money. I know I lust over gear a lot on this channel, and the majority of you who watch my channel who subscribe are really into gear, and so we share that love. Yeah, the R5 It's a beauty. I just wanted to make a video on it, give it some props, give it some praise, because it's going to be in my arsenal for years to come, even if it's relegated to backup duty or a second shooter at a wedding. It's a first shooter's camera, right? Another thing about this camera to keep in mind is once the R5 Mark II drops, a lot of these are going to come out on the used market. Canon's already doing rebates on the first version, this version. So if you're on the fence and you're thinking, oh man, do I need to go buy the new one? You probably don't, unless you just need 61 megapixels. You've got the hard drive space. You do very in-demand video work. But if you're just a stills photographer, you're doing things like shooting weddings and all that, this is what the best photographers at this very moment are using who are Canon shooters, other than, say, the R3. So this is already a top-of-the-line camera right now, and the best of the best, the ambassadors that you see on the Canon website and, you know, these very well-known photographers out there, this is what they're using. So in 3 or 4 months, when the next camera comes out, if you have that lust, that's fine, but you can still use this. I always tell people when they're asking about new gear, it's like, hey, should I get the new one or the old one? And I'm always like, well, did people take pictures 40 or 50 years ago that were amazing? And they're always like, well, yeah, of course they did. And I'm like, exactly. So if you're just taking pictures, chances are, yes, of course it's going to be great enough for what you do. There's some small things, like I said, some small things that it doesn't do well. We've already addressed those. But if those don't affect you, you maybe save a little bit of money, because the new one's going to be about $4,000, right? So, but anyway, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time giving some love to my favorite camera. Yes, I do shoot a lot of Fuji these days as well, but old, reliable, everything fits like a glove. The R5, I love it. I thank all of you for watching today's episode. If you like what you saw today, click the subscribe button below. I appreciate your support. And until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.